Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our Mental Health Awareness Week. And on behalf of my co-host, Pastor Todd, who is the Stewardship Director, and Edith Samambwa, who is the Health Ministries Director. This year, we chose to do loneliness as our theme, and we're going to walk through all different types of loneliness every night. And today, we have chronic loneliness with Sister Edith. What do we have tomorrow, Pastor Todd?
Well, tomorrow we have social and situational loneliness with Pastor Ray. So that is our topic for tomorrow.
And on Wednesday, we do have emotional loneliness. And on Thursday, Pastor Todd?
Oh, we would have the spiritual loneliness. Some people doesn't think that we would have spiritual loneliness, but surely do we have the topic as well with Pastor Wajo.
And finally, on Friday, Pastor?
That will be the social loneliness with Sister Sharon McDonald Platt.
And sometimes when we think about loneliness, we don't think about it in such a broad view. We just think maybe of social loneliness. And tonight, Sister Edith, you are going to talk to us about chronic loneliness. But before we do that, this is about mental health. Pastor Todd, how does your department stewardship come into mental health?
Well, yes, as you may have noticed with the title that we have, Managing Our Mental Health. Well, stewardship affects every aspect of our life. And one part of it, as we all know, the temple, our body, is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which we need to look after too. In so many ways, some people would just look at it as health, but we know when it comes to health, mental health is very much connected to it. And that's why, we work together with Sister Edith as well on this program. So however we manage, however we look after our thoughts, there's one thing that I would always say when it comes to the word stewardship. It's an acronym, and the second letter on it is letter T. And I would always promote it as the thought management. And I believe this is where the managing of our mental health comes in.
Wow. That is so good. And of course, Sister Edith, health?
Well, I suppose as Pastor Todd rightly stated that, without mental health, we don't have any health.
Yes.
And so it's very important that we partner together with the different departments to address mental health as well as other health issues, because they affect and impact how we do church, how we interact, how we live our lives. And of course, mental health is a major interest of mine and an area that I'm very much aware that as a church, we've always more or less focused on physical health. But thankfully, in the last number of years, we've been working on how we can be more holistically oriented as a congregation, and also in terms of impacting the community, because of the fact that it's so important. I like what Pastor Todd said, that thought management is the most important thing, bringing our thoughts into captivity.
Yes.
And that is the essence of life, really.
And there is no health without mental health. Without further ado, we are going to hand over to you, Sister Edith. And just to let everybody know, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to ask Pastor Todd to just play us a short clip as we introduce this very vital topic of loneliness. And I know there's some people who are wondering because we've rearranged the order of speakers, so there may have been some of us.
Yes.
I can go for days, at least, a few days without speaking to anybody. You know that if you didn't make the effort to just go out for an hour, food shopping or something, you could go for months, I think, without actually speaking to anybody. And even then, when you are speaking to somebody, it's just the checkout girl or somebody like that, So you do make conversation a little bit. And that's why when you see older people, they often tend to talk too much. And I think it's a result of loneliness.
Thank you so much, Pastor Todd. Watching that video and just realizing how challenging or how challenged people are with this story of loneliness. And it's quite scary because we often don't think about what is going on with the people around us and what is going on in the communities. I've had the privilege over the years of working in different mental health places. I've worked in dementia care and older age mental health services in England. And I know Sister Tembi will remember me when I was working in Wisbech. This was something I would speak to her every day. I used to say to her, if there's anything that I would want the church to do, if there's a service that I would always think, and if I think of what could I do for the community, I always think I would like to have a befriending service. Always. And every time I see this subject of loneliness and in my work, as I go around where I've worked in mental health and in social services, I always think to myself, what is it that we could do that would impact the greatest number of people besides what we do normally? And as a church, I really believe, and I'm just putting this, it's a huge hint. If there are any health ministries leaders here, social services, or people in the community services, I really believe that this is an area we could really impact our communities to the point that, as you saw in the video, that the government has appointed a minister for loneliness. Can you believe that? That is the magnitude of the problem that we have. I'm looking as an outsider coming in. I've only been in England for the last 6 years, and where I worked before, it was slightly different. And of course, I'm from Zimbabwe, and the way we do social life is very different. And then looking at what goes on and seeing from an outsider's point of view, and also as an immigrant, we're going to see some of the risk factors to loneliness. as a new person in the country, as a person who may not have come on with a huge family network, how that impacts myself and what I can see really we could do and help people with loneliness and chronic loneliness. So I'm hoping that our brains are beginning to do some, maybe we're thinking, what can we do? What can we do as we want to impact other people with this idea of loneliness? So it's as bad as you saw in the video, it's as bad as smoking. And I know as we talk about stop smoking, we give people wisdom on how to stop smoking and advice, and we educate people on healthy living. But imagine that we actually had a program and initiatives in the church to impact this loneliness issue in the same way that we have other programs to impact physical health and to impact other people in their way that they live and impact people. And I know we've seen so many stories, and it's really sad that when we see the stories, it's probably a bit late when we hear stories of people that died and nobody knew they had died. We hear stories of people that were found dead for weeks, if not months. The neighbors only contacted the police or the social services because there were maggots coming out of this person's flat, or they smelled something really bad. And that is when they decided that they were probably going to take a look. As the lady said in the video, you could go for months without actually seeing someone. And I have seen times when I've used the bus. There have been times when I've used the bus and I have seen how the older people like to chat. They'll talk to you about anything and everything. And it has taught me, as I've reflected on this fact, that a lot of people, not just elderly people, but a lot of people are living in isolated situations. I saw this picture. I found this picture on Google yesterday, and I just thought how it's an impressive picture. It's really impressive, the fact that you've got those mountains in the background, and then you've got this barrenness, and then this one elephant. And you know what really impressed me? Elephants don't travel alone. They travel in herds. They travel in families. It would be so unusual to see an elephant going for miles on its own. When you see one elephant, there's likely to be another lot of elephants nearby. This is because we were made to be social. Animals were made to be social. When you see birds, more often than not, they flock in twos or fours or whatever number. The same with most animals. Rarely do you see an animal that goes on its own. And because that is not how we were created. God meant for us to have human connection, to have contact, to have others around us. And we know this. This is not something new. I'm not telling us anything new. The truth of the matter, though, is that there are often times where we find ourselves all by ourselves. There's a song that was sung by Eric Carmen. I looked at the lyrics yesterday. I was tempted to print to have them on screen, and then I thought I would just depress everyone, because this song, and I know you know the song. If I don't want to sing it, but the most popular line is "All by myself." I don't want to be all by myself. And this person is an older person now. They're reflecting on how when they were young, they just used to have relationships for fun. But now they realize that relationships are for more than just fun, that they want something more meaningful in their lives. They want proper heart connection, and they don't want to be all by themselves. And I feel that this is something that we can all relate to. This is something, and the reason why I didn't want to print that song or to transcript that and put it on the screen is because I feel that, and this is something that I want to say as a disclaimer at the beginning, whilst we're not doing therapy during this session and during this week, what we're going to talk about may trigger some people. And if you feel that you've been triggered, it is something that has resonated with you, where you feel it impacts you, affects you individually, or you know someone, I encourage you to reach out to, we have Sister Mapingire, who is the director for Cornerstone Counseling Service, and that you reach out to Cornerstone Counseling. We will share the details later, and talk to someone. Sometimes that's all we need to do if we can't find people within our own environment, but to have that human contact, even if it's a professional human contact, and also to deal with some of the reasons why you may be all by yourself. So this is not how, and like I say, this is not how God wanted us to do. To do life. So I'm just going to define loneliness as an introduction. So the loneliness are the negative feelings that occur when we feel that our needs for social contact are not met. So these are the feelings that we have when we feel that our needs for social contact are not being met. Now, I've put in the word feel there because it is a subjective and also individual experience. So I can't decide that you're not lonely. It's your decision to say, I feel lonely. And I might look at you, for example, and you'll be surrounded with many people. So that's an important thing. There's a differentiation between being alone. I might live alone and do life literally by myself in so many ways, but I may not feel lonely. And there might be someone here who is surrounded by people with family and seemingly has so much social connection physically, but actually is lonely. So we cannot judge for another person and say, well, you shouldn't be lonely. You feel, and this often happens. Why do you say that? You've got so many people around you. You've got your family. How about your friends? But that feeling of being lonely is a very subjective one. And sometimes it may not make sense to those who are looking at us from the outside. So there is a difference between being alone versus being lonely. So that's an important thing. We must understand the difference, that and understanding that difference makes all the difference as well. It makes all the difference to us as individuals to know that just because I'm going through maybe a season, an episode, or some time where I'm doing life alone does not necessarily need to make me lonely. And that's a very important thing, because often what we find, and we're going to talk about this a little later when we talk about the reasons why people may experience loneliness, is that we often compare ourselves with other people who seem to be surrounded by so much social activity and seem to have so many social connections. And then because we make that comparative judgment, sometimes we may decide that we're lonely, whereas our lives are actually quite full. And we may actually have our connection needs being met, maybe by one or two friends, or even spiritually, or even through the activities that we're doing when we go to work and we meet other people, or maybe even through the phone. So there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. The second difference that it makes is what we spoke about earlier, that other people looking at you should not make a judgment that because you're surrounded by so many people, it means that you're okay and that all is well. And that is important for us. We're always talking about listening in and watching what people are experiencing. So as we go about our business in work or in church, within the communities that we live in, we want to be listening in and to learn that art of being able to tell how people are feeling. Sometimes they may say things or they may look a certain way that can imply to us that maybe not all things are okay, even though they may seem to have it all together. And that's a very important thing. I want to encourage that. We do offer listening skills training. I think Cornerstone does that. And I really suggest that we tap into all this training that we have, not just so that we can have lots of training, but so that it can inform how we live and deal with other people around us. Very, very important. So what are the causes of loneliness? What would make some people lonely? So We know that experiencing bereavement can create a shift in our social contacts, and this is particularly important for older people and those who have lived a long time in marriage, and suddenly their partner, their spouse is gone, and they have a vacuum and a gap. So that's a very important time for people where they may experience loneliness, and sometimes it's not immediate. It could happen maybe way after this person has bereaved and when people are gone. Now, where I come from, we do bereavement socially. We have lots of people that come around us, they keep us company, but it's only for a limited time. And then eventually you are left all by yourself. And sometimes that can lead to times when you just feel like, I don't have that connection that I had. And it could be someone significant like a friend. It doesn't have to be even just someone like a spouse, but even a friend that you confided in, that you spoke with, that was sort of a confidante for you. Their absence can create that sense of loneliness. Going through a relationship breakup, probably even sometimes more traumatic than in the immediate, than someone going through a bereavement. So whether it's a divorce or a breakup of a relationship, so all that can create that. And I'm very concerned. And those of you who have heard me speak sometimes will hear that I have a concern for men's mental health. And I'm always sharing how it's so important that we be on the lookout when men go through divorce, because this is a very crucial time, particularly in the Middle Ages. And the reason for this is that many men have their social needs met by their spouse, their wife, or by their in-laws. Really interesting. And when this breakup happens, this divorce happens, they may have a few friends, but they're spending most of their time with their wife, their children, their in-laws, their brother-in-law, their sister-in-law, maybe even their parents-in-law are quite significant social contacts for them. And when divorce happens, often women will have people that gravitate towards them to support them, to encourage them. They'll have their friends that they're talking to. They may even go for therapy. They have their own parents and so on. And sometimes even their in-laws are sort of on their side, let me put it that way. And they may still stay connected to their in-laws differently for men, that this may not happen, and they may end up without all of those connections that they've had maybe for 20 years or 30 years. And this creates a very serious vacuum for men in their middle ages, which is something I've seen it in practice. It was always a red flag. We do a red flag. We put red flags for certain characteristics and demographic features for different people in mental health. What increases their risk of suicide and so on. And this is one of the problems and the reasons why men in their middle ages have the highest risk of suicide of any other person in the population, is when they go through divorce. So I'm just wanting to encourage us, if we have friends, if we have brothers, if we have uncles, if we have parents, anyone that you know that is of a male gender, that it is going through relationship difficulties, take the time, if you can, to give them support, to just listen, to talk, and to allow them to have that social contact as well. Now, another reason why people may be experiencing loneliness or is retiring and losing the social contacts you had at work, which is why I don't encourage people to retire. Unless you're retiring on medical grounds. I really believe that God wanted us to work until we couldn't, really. But, we have a social structure that makes people retire because we need to make space for other people to come and work. And that can really hamper our physical health as well as our mental health. Not only does it impact our sense of connectedness with the rest of the world, suddenly you are in the backseat. And there's all the other things related to that. I'm no longer useful. I'm no longer being able to contribute to society. We need a sense of purpose. Activity, meaningful activity, work gives us that sense of purpose, that sense of I am valuable in society. And we want to continue to impact society as best as we can, even if it means on a scaled down level. and you're working from home, or you're working part-time, or you're volunteering, or you're giving to your family through some other productive means, maybe, going to do the garden or something like that, or even contributing to your community through Tidy Towns and being physically active as well. It will allow you to remain mentally active as well as to stay connected to people. So I recommend work for as long as you can, physically and mentally. It's really helpful for us. Changing jobs as well can help make you feel isolated from co-workers. Now, we've talked about being alone and loneliness as a subjective thing. If you're a person who's sociable, who's probably a little bit more outgoing, doing these changes might be easier than someone who's an introvert who struggles with actually communicating and interacting with other people. So it may not be that changing the job is a problem. Many of us have changed jobs, gone to different places, and because we have an ability to get into that space and interact and connect with people and do that easily, we may not feel for long disconnected from the environment that we're in. So it also brings to our mind, and I want to encourage us as we do this workshops, for us to think about ourselves, be aware of what is it. There are intervening factors, like we said earlier. It's not a given that because you're alone, you're going to be lonely, or that you've moved jobs, you're going to be lonely, or you've had a breakup, you're going to be lonely. There are other intervening factors that we can put in place. For example, if I learned how to interact with people, how to put myself out there, I can make more friends. And that way I won't be as lonely. So think about your own experience and what you could be doing as we talk through this. Starting university, I was fortunate that when I went to university, I was blessed that I went to university with my best friends from high school that I had known since Form 1. Right? First year in high school, I had the same group of friends all the way through 6 years of high school. We went and did the same degrees. Some did a few things. So I never had the growing pains of going into university and learning to make friends. And of course, I made new friends while I was there, but I've mostly kept these friends since I was 12 or 13, and some of them are still my friends. I was talking to one of them this evening before this event, and we still chat, we still talk, we still see each other, but it's not always going to be the same. And we think about this when we think, if you've got children, if you've got teenagers that are starting university or even starting out at a new high school, at high school, what is going on in their minds or what is going on in their lives? Could they be experiencing loneliness? And how can we best help them to adapt and to adjust to that new environment? Or moving to a new area, which is something I've done a couple of times in my life, new country with our family. When I first moved to Ireland in 2003, I knew one person in the country. I knew just one person. And I was met at the airport by the person who the agency sent when I started work there. She became my friend. So she was my second friend in the country. But I had a friend there already. And that's all I had going to that place. And the town I lived in was a small little town. And I didn't know anyone. But the person who was our immigration officer knew everyone, and particularly the foreigners, and would say to us, I'm going to give you their number. So it really helped to have someone who was connecting us. And then I was able to make friends. And I'm thinking about this as we're talking about how to have community networks. Think about the people who are in your church. Who's new? Who's an immigrant? Who's coming in from outside town? Who's coming in from outside area? Who's different than yourself? Because we want to be conscious of these things and think about, how can I best help people to integrate? How can we help them to feel more at home? Should we have more potluck together? Because when people eat together, they get to know each other better. Should we invite them for lunch and have them come and visit us? And I found when I moved, and reflecting on my own experience, when I moved, what really helped was that my workmates were very friendly. And they made it a point to invite me to their homes. My neighbors were also quite friendly. So I would always be having cups of tea everywhere. Right. And it was, a proper berries Irish tea that I was having. And though I wasn't a tea drinker, a black tea drinker, it was good for me to go. and meet and socialize with people and maybe even have a cup of tea, because it helped me to make friends and to know people better. So these are some of the reasons why people can be lonely. So we saw in the video that people who are lonely are as bad as people who are smoking in terms of their physical health. It impacts them that badly. But we also know that there are certain increased risks of mental health problems. It's a risk for diseases such as depression, illnesses such as depression, anxiety. It also impacts our ability to feel good about ourselves, sleep difficulties. It can cause people to have sleep difficulty, increased stress. Poor physical health is also linked to loneliness, right? So, and also physical self-neglect. So there are people who won't bother to wash themselves because there's no one to see. They're not going to go and have visitors. I mean, all of us usually try a little bit more when we're visitors, right? If you have people coming, you're probably going to hoover. At least I do. I change things around. I'm going to try and be neater. I'm going to cook better. I'm going to have a better meal. I'm going to think more about what I'm serving, the dishes I'm using. Now, these are things that we do to look after other people. I'm going to recommend that even when you don't have visitors, even when you have no one coming to visit you, treat yourself as the best visitor on earth. Treat yourself with the same amount of care that you would give another person. I promise you, it's going to make such a huge difference. We talked about that affective experience, that we don't necessarily experience loneliness the same. And it's really a lot to do with what we're thinking, as Pastor Todd said, our thought management, and often how we also choose to live our lives and be out there. So we can experience all these things. So we're also talking about some of the lifestyle factors that also increase what we call vulnerability factors. We talked about when are people more likely to be lonely, but when are you going to have increased risk, right? Besides the fact that you've gone to uni and so on, when you have no friends or family, you are more vulnerable. When you're estranged from your family. Now, that's an important thing, because I've heard people who say, I don't talk to. And usually the people they're not talking to are family. I don't talk to my brother. I don't talk to my sister. I don't talk to my parents. And we have all these people. And now what also happens is that when we are not talking to whoever, we build shells around ourselves. We have to, because if you're estranged from people, you're going to have to build walls, right? You're trying to limit their contact with you. You're also trying to limit and pretend that you're okay. You're holding yourself aloof, because really it's not usual for us to have cold, frosty relationships, particularly with family. It isn't healthy. And so when we know this, your brain knows this. And in order for us to have this sense of, I'm okay, even if I'm not talking to people, even if I'm not talking to such and such a person at church, we have to put up walls. And we have to build these shells around ourselves, which mean that we're limiting our joy. We're limiting our ability to interact, not just with our family members, but with other people. Imagine if you're estranged from your family and your family is connected to friends that you know, and connected to your church, and connected to other people. That means that you're not going to talk to those people and those people and those people. So this is going to limit you and really shrink your world. Now, I do understand that the experiences we've had within families, mostly it's the people closest to us that hurt us the most. But it is so important for us to find ways of resolving things, going through things, and forgiving people, and living with a lightness in our minds, in our spirit, that allows us to be open to relationships and open to even some of those people coming back into our lives. If you're a single parent or a carer, you may find it difficult or hard to maintain a social life. And this happens a lot when people become parents, that they have to be with their children, and that can also increase their vulnerability factor. And that is why the government actually spends a lot of time doing used to spend a lot of time doing work with carers and supporting carers. and giving them time, giving them respite so that they can go and meet with friends. You can get that support. If you are a carer looking after a child or a disabled person or an elderly person, you can get help through your local authority so that you can get respite, so you can have hours, social hours for yourself and time for yourself. So that's important. If we belong to minority groups and live in an area without others from a similar background, that can also increase our risk of loneliness. Other vulnerability factors: being excluded from social activities due to mobility problems or a shortage of money. So when we have a disability that limits our ability to interact with other people, when we're experiencing discrimination and stigma because of a disability or long-term health problem, including mental health problems, people who have schizophrenia especially are very much at risk of loneliness, because often it's a very visible type of mental health difficulty that also creates difficulties for them in terms of communication and socializing. And it can mean that they have very few friends and they have very little interaction with the outside world. Also, we may experience discrimination because of our gender or our race. That can happen in workplaces, that can happen sometimes in church. So this is very real. Or we have experienced sexual or physical abuse. People who may have trauma in their background may find it harder to form close relationships with other people and may keep other people at bay because of that. And I just thought I'd put this in here. Social media, likes and dislikes. What we know is that our perception of who we are, whether we think we're worthy, whether we think we're people who are worthy of interacting with. There's some people who think they have nothing to say and that people won't listen to them. And consequently, they don't try to make relationships. They don't try and reach out to other people because they don't feel worthy. They don't like themselves and they think other people will not like them. And consequently, that impairs their willingness to go out and make friends. They walk into a room and they just want to hide. They go to the corner. They don't try out new things, new activities, new places. They stay by themselves. And that obviously will limit and shrink their world. So it's very important, like I said earlier, when you see these things and think about yourself, how do I feel about myself? Do I feel that when I come into a room, I belong there as much as someone else? Because this is a big factor for people in terms of whether they choose to then be in that space, to shrink, to sit in the corner. Have you ever seen those people who are the life and soul of the party? They come into the room and everybody gravitates towards them. And they say, hey, and they're laughing, they're having fun. And maybe you're that sort of person that doesn't do that, and you wish you could do that. You wish you could be a person that would just walk into a room and you feel fine and comfortable, right? What I recommend is get help. If you're that person who sits at the back, like I said, I'm going to be plugging in for CCS here. And Sister Tembi, you're going to have lots and lots of people calling you, texting you, saying, yes, we need to do some work on my self-esteem. I need to do some work on my communication skills, my listening skills. I want to learn. I want to do mental health first aid, because always we must be growing. And I want to encourage you that your sense of identity, your self-concept, and so on are all part of your journey and of growing. You are not packed and down and put in a box at 16, because there are many of us who say, I've always been shy, and so shyness limits them. I've always been shy. I can't talk to people. I was born like this. I've hardly seen a child that is shy. I don't know about you, but most children I see, especially under 3, they're out there. They don't mind being seen. They don't mind people watching them. They have no consciousness. That self-consciousness, we develop it as people tell us what's right and what's wrong, and tell us, no, you can't lift your skirt up in front of everyone, like most little girls may do sometimes. And of course, some of those things are important and we need to know social proprieties. But generally, we become self-conscious and shy because of our environment. And then we carry that sometimes throughout life, and it limits our ability to be with other people and enjoy our lives. So what are we going to do? How do we deal with loneliness? Now, I'm going to share with you some verses. I'm going to talk to you about some things that God is saying that are important for us as we talk about this. But I want you to remember, the first thing I want you to remember is that you are never alone. You really are never alone. You may have a perception of being alone, but as we talk through these verses, I'm going to be sharing verses which are basically your cure, in other words, or your way to deal with loneliness that I found from the Word, because I believe in the Word of God. We have medicine, we have psychology, we have sociology, and all the things that we need to know about how to live and have an abundant life. This is what Jesus said. He wants us to have an abundant life at every stage of our lives. And we must recognize that we go through seasons. So as we go through those seasons of life, there's a time for this, there's a time for that. In the golden ages, right? We experience less of what we had when we were younger, but it doesn't mean that we should be isolated and not enjoy our lives. God says to us, wherever we are in our settings, we're never alone, because he will never ever leave us. In fact, the verse is, I will never ever leave you, nor ever will I forsake you. So it's a double emphasis. It's not just never will I leave you, or never will I forsake you. It says I never ever, and never ever will I forsake you. And in reference to the first part of this verse, is saying be content with what you have. It's teaching us to have gratitude for the lives that we have. And I want to encourage us to look at what we have. Look at the friends we have. Look at the connections that we actually have already, and what is possible as well. Because sometimes we look at what we want or what we think we should have. For example, I wish I had hundreds of fans on social media, etc. When you have friends who call you or who are waiting for you to call them and are willing to give you that support. So when we are content and we have gratitude for what God has given us to meet our needs, we will then begin to even expand our sense of abundance and what we actually have. And eventually, also, most importantly, realize that when we have God, we have everything. And I know it doesn't make up for the social connections that God said we must have. And so God wants us to, and actually facilitates this for us in our lives. So that's important. So number two, God says we're never alone. He has graven us on the palms of his hands. So know that God is watching over us, and your walls are continually before him. He has never forsaken us, and he never will. No, neither will you beg for bread. This is what God is saying. So that's the number one thing. Know that God is with you and that he's making provision for all your needs, including your need for social connectedness. Number two, we can learn to make more connections with other people. The Proverbs 18 verse 24 says, a man that has friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, speaking about Jesus, our friend. But most importantly, we do have friends that stick closer than brothers. I'm sure many of us can raise their hands and say, yes, I have a friend, I have a best friend who has been there for me even more than my family. I'm sure there's someone out there who will say, if you can raise your hand and say, yes, I have a friend who's like that. But here's what this verse is saying. More often than not, we wait for people to contact us. I need you to call me. I had a friend who used to get moody and say to me, well, you haven't called me such and such and such a time, right? And I would say, well, you could call me too, right? And we could have a chat, because I know if you want to talk to me, call me and I'm happy to talk. And I had to sort of teach them that I have an open door policy, that you can pick up the phone and you can ring me, especially if you WhatsApp me. If I'm busy, I'll call you back. But I had to teach them that yes, I want to be your friend, but you want to be my friend too. So call me. So we must take that initiative. And I said earlier that if you struggle with taking the initiative to be the one that goes out and says, hey, I miss you. Are you okay? Do you want to go for lunch? Do you want to do this? Or do you want to do that? You and I can learn to do those things. We can learn to be more outgoing and approach other people as far as making connections are concerned. Number three, Love the one you're with. Now, if those of you that know me from childhood know that I love to sing, I think through songs. I've been surrounded by music most of my life in the church and at home. And every time I see something, I think of a song that reminds me of that, whether it's a song in the Bible, in the hymn book, or a song elsewhere. And this is one song that some of you might know, Love the One You're With. And I'm referencing this song with this verse in mind. Proverbs 27:10 says, do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. And I know many of us would love to have family around us, and maybe we would love to have that best friend. I was separated from my best friend, and in 2000 and earlier than 2000, when she went off to South Africa, we'd always be on the phone with each other and so on. But I had to learn to make other friends. And the people around me were friends, my neighbors. I always tell a story of my friend Mary and her husband Martin. Mary and Martin, in 2007, I had a medical calamity. I developed blood clots in my leg after a flight, and it was a very serious experience because I should have died, but for the grace of God, because the blood clots traveled and were stopped prior to my lungs. I don't know how that works. God did it. Don't ask me how, but it was as if God put a bridge, a block, and say, you will not go anywhere. These clots were found in my iliofemoral, in my vein just before my lungs. So I had a very challenging time after that, though, where I couldn't walk and I couldn't drive and I wasn't able to do much. And this was in 2007. And I remember Mary and Martin. Mary would take me to the hospital, take me to my appointments. I had to go and get my bloods done every 2 days to check the coagulant factor, etc. I was on these medications, and I had also to go to the hospital. I had shopping. Martin would cook breakfast for me. They lived across me at number 30. I was at number 28, and they would come and bring me breakfast on a tray. They would bring me food. He would do my garden. I had another neighbor across the road who would do my front garden and come with all sorts of ideas. So I was surrounded by all these amazing people, none of them Adventist. Mary and Martin didn't go to church at all. They'd had an experience that made them feel that they couldn't trust God. And the other person practiced Eastern religions, and they would come and support me. And for those years, I had 2 years where I struggled with mobility and so on. I had people who would drive from Dublin, I lived far from Dublin, to come and pick me up to go to church beyond Dublin, drive me there and bring me home. And this person didn't live in my town, my friend Belinda. These are people I met in Ireland. These are my neighbors. I wanted my sister to come and stay with me. She couldn't get a visa. Now, I could have stayed in my house and said, well, there goes me. But God had provided neighbors. I had made friends with them prior to this. We'd just become neighbors. We'd moved into that estate earlier that year. So it wasn't like I knew them for years, but they were there. And I'm telling this story to impress upon all of us the need to nurture the relationships around us. Whether sometimes at work, you might find that person that will be that help in time of need, that God can use for you. It could be your neighbor saying hello, even if they never say anything. Sister Tembi told me a story about a gentleman she'd always meet on the road every time she'd be walking. And one time he didn't see her and he was worried that he hadn't seen her for a long time. These are people that you may go for a walk in your neighborhood, say hello, pop in and just knock and just say, I was thinking about you. Are you okay? And I promise that when we reach out to other people, because people are just as frightened as we are, they may be just as shy as we think we are, they may be feeling just as inadequate as we might think in terms of making these connections, and they're just waiting for someone to smile and to say, hey, I see you. And I see you and you're okay. And that would make a difference for you. And that verse also says, don't neglect your father's friend. Don't neglect the elderly people that belonged to your friend, your parents. Look after them. Go see them. They will provide you with vital wisdom, but also wonderful connections. So love the one that is with you. Now, the next one says, love the one you're with in reference to you. Talked about this earlier on, our subjective feeling of loneliness and disconnectedness from other people often correlates with our disconnectedness with ourselves. When we feel unloved and unlovable, we're more likely to experience this feeling of loneliness and being separate from the world and from everyone else. As someone said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the center in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. God says that love your neighbor as you love yourself. Have the same regard that you are important. That when you spend time by yourself, that is worthwhile time. That when you have time to read and you're talking to yourself, that you're actually talking to someone important. And I value those times. I've worked in public health services all my life. And I remember when I used to work in Ireland in the mental health service, I would spend most of my day talking to people who were depressed, who were anxious, who were tired. And I would come home and all I wanted was silence. I just wanted silence. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to actually, because I felt that need to be just grounded within myself and to come back to myself, because you've been giving all day. And I realized how important it was for me to care for myself and to do self-care and to have self-compassion. And that's so important, to look after you and to mind your mind. You'll find that that really helps. The next part of making connections, so this is number 4, 5, I'm losing track. So knowing that God is with you and having that relationship with God is number 1. 2, making an effort to make connections and show yourself friendly. Number 3, loving those around you and nurturing those relationships. Number 4, taking care of yourself. Number 5, making connections through physical activity. Go out and find a hobby, interact with others, go to a club, cooking club, baking club, flower arranging, come and interact with others at potluck, at church, and you'll find that the more you do, the more you're meeting different people also from different backgrounds. Don't just, if you love baking, great. You can go to baking and make friends there. But if you say, for example, go to baking or you go running, because after you've been baking and eating cake, you might want to go running. And so you join an athletics club or a walking club in your neighborhood, and you make friends that like to exercise. And then you might go and sing, or you might go to Aquafit. And while you're there, you're making friends with people there, and you're feeling your life with so much connectedness with other people. So I encourage us all to go out and live life and interact with other people, join something, join a club, and if all else fail, volunteer to befriend other people. This will help you. Instead of you looking for others to come and meet those needs, there are so many other people who are looking for those needs to be met. And I can tell you this, that you would make someone stay if you just knock on their door and say, hey, I'm here from our befriending service. I'm just here to have a cup of tea with you. If you want, bring your own tea bag if you think, but I feel that if you have their tea, you're going to make better friends. And maybe it's just for 1 cup of tea a week that you do that with. And I really recommend that. Go out and volunteer in your community, volunteer with your tidy towns. I like tidy towns because I like tidy towns. So I'm always recommending people to join, go help clean up your streets, pick papers and so on, and make the gardens pretty and weed the place. I used to volunteer in my little town in Ireland for that because I love seeing pretty backgrounds and flower beds and all that. So, and I like gardening. So I would volunteer for tidy towns, and I got to meet other people through that. Join a club, even at work, an after work club or something where you do something together. I'm currently part of Toastmasters with a club that's in London. I don't live in London, but I've made friends with these people. I meet them every 2 weeks. and we talk, we learn how to speak better, how to lead better, and all sorts of other things. And that's broadened my world and helped me to know so many other people. So let's go out and make connections and do what we love. The garden, as you can see, garden is a very big theme in my life, and it's something that I love to do with others. Share your feelings. Find time to talk to someone. If you're feeling lonely, that is, and other feelings too. You know, talk to that person, say, you know what, I need you. Now, I'm probably an open spirit in a way. So if Sister Tempe would tell you, I'll text her and I'll be like, oh, I'm feeling like this. And then she'll talk to me and give me a book to read. And now I have so many books this week. So many books came through Amazon for me. I'm like, okay, I'll read this one. I'll read this one. This is her the way of working. In case she'll be like, get this book, and I recommend it too, because sometimes we need to think and we need to process things, and books can help us to do that. So yeah, that's her treatment for when I'm feeling a little iffy. And she'll say, go get this book. I know this book. I know this book. And so I go get that book, and I'm excited about it. I was telling her yesterday, I was feeling a bit like challenged by a particular book she recommended. And then in terms of its content and the subject matter. And then I chose to be excited about it. And I started feeling this excitement instead of feeling a fear of what I'm going to find in there. I actually started embracing that, wow, this is going to help me. And I'm excited about it. And this evening, I can't wait to do my next chapter. So yes, thank you, Sister Tembi. So I recommend share your feelings with others. They might have solutions to how you're feeling. They might signpost you in the right direction, whether it be a book, a club, or someone you could talk to. They might even know people who like similar interests to yourself and say, hey, do you know there's a club where they do this, or they play music, or jazz club, or whatever? Do you want to like line dancing? Do you like cooking? Do you like knitting? You can be, share with others, and that will be helpful. What I've learned in life is people actually prefer for us to talk to them about how we're feeling and to open up ourselves to them than for us to always be the therapist for them. People prefer for us to show that vulnerability, that I'm not okay now and I need you, because it makes them feel needed. It makes them feel valued, that we actually value their friendship and value their wisdom and their advice. So I really, really recommend talking to someone and sharing your feelings. Now, are you lonely or are you just? Sometimes we feel lonely when we're hungry. Sometimes we feel lonely when we're just bored, like this cat. I just need someone to talk to. And what we've said is that keep yourself meaningfully occupied. You don't need to be overly busy, because that could be a way of also hiding the fact that you are lonely and that you need social connectedness. Some people get so busy, they don't have time to think. That's not what I'm recommending. We don't want that. We want to have time for ourselves to go into that space when we need to be alone. It's very important. And sometimes it's necessary if we work in certain places. And even sometimes after church, has anyone ever felt like, I just want to be by myself after church? Because you were surrounded by so many people and so much chatter that you just needed quiet. I don't know if it's just me, but there are times when I feel like my Sundays should just have nothing else except me and the garden and maybe music, because of so much that has gone on, and we need to have that balance. Are we lonely, or are we making comparisons with other people and seeing others as happy, surrounded by others, getting on with life and so on, and our lives are nothing in comparison, or they pale in comparison? Are we tired? Sometimes we feel more lonely when we're tired and we're bored. So someone is going to talk about situational loneliness later. I think it's it's tomorrow actually. On Wednesday. Pastor Ray Patrick, he will be talking about situational loneliness. So there's some situations that predispose us to that, but we need to weigh that and see. Am I just hungry? I just need to eat, and in physiological cravings. And what I mean by this is that food is one thing, not feeling hungry, but sometimes we're missing certain vitamins that are important for our mind health, like B12 and B6 and omega-3s and 6s and those good fats. They help us to have emotional stability. And when we are missing those, we have physiological cravings that create that I need something. And that I need something can make us reach out for things like chocolate or sugar, or sometimes other people's company, and sometimes it may be bad company. So we need to be careful of that and watch what's actually going on physiologically and also in our minds. What are we thinking? I'm going to end this with this statement from Jesus from Matthew 28, verse 20, where he says, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. You know, the reality of life is that there is a potential that even our own family will abandon us in the last days. We're told that we'll be betrayed by family members, friends, and we may have to walk a journey, do a journey alone, a spiritual journey alone, and maybe even a physical one in the last times, in the last days. But we're assured by God that He's always going to be with us, even unto the end of the world. So if there's anyone here who is feeling that way, who's, even after everything that I've said, may still be feeling like, I'm so lonely and I do need God to reassure me, I want to encourage you to know this: God for sure is with you. And know for sure that you can get help and that there are people willing to listen. And like I said, we would share the information about CCS and where you can get support from a professional point of view. If you're dealing with issues, challenges to your mental health, your emotional health that are impacting your feeling of loneliness or connectedness with others, highly, highly recommend that you make contact and get help. But remember that God is with you, and that He loves you, and that He is your Father. He's watching your every step, and He knows exactly what you need, and never shall you miss what you are meant to have in your life at whatever season in your life. And recognizing that is such an important thing. May God bless you as we continue with this series in the course of the week. I know that there's going to be a lot more shared, and we're going to learn a lot more about this topic and hear stories. And I think that's important, to hear stories. I shared my story about the times when everyone, you know, when I didn't have people from my own family, but I found help from my neighbors. And I really believe that you will hear amazing stories in the course of the week from others, personal stories from other presenters and people who are coming on to share their testimonies of loneliness and what they did and how God came through for them. And some of the people may be familiar to you, but you've never heard their stories. So I encourage you to come and to be part of this series this week, and to continue on until the rest of the week, and also to invite others. We will have it on YouTube. Sure, Todd will inform us once we finished editing. This evening's session will be posted on YouTube as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and God bless you. And I'm looking forward to an amazing week with all of us on here. And I'm just going to hand it back to Thembi and Pastor Todd.
Thank you so much, Edith, for that very enlightening, lively presentation. And we do realize I was quite intrigued by the fact that loneliness is as bad as smoking. We just don't realize how much when God says He wants us to be whole, so many things actually kill us, besides the things like smoking, drinking, and illness that we know. Loneliness can be as bad as smoking. Thank you for that. If you do have any questions, please unmute. Or I've seen one question here whilst people are thinking about their question. What is the difference between being lonely and being alone? I had actually written that one down as well. You're muted, Edith.
So what is the difference between alone and being lonely?
Yes.
Okay, so aloneness is a physical state, right? So where maybe for a season, a time, you are living or in your own space by yourself. And that can happen to all of us at different times in our lives. So for example, when you're younger, when you're at uni, when you've been bereaved, or even as a single person, you may live by yourself without other people. So that's aloneness. What is different is that being lonely is a subjective feeling. And what I mean by that is a sense that you have yourself from how you perceive your life to be. So for example, I would probably say that the majority of my life I've lived alone. I would probably say that. And I have been, since I left home at 18, I never went back home. I went to uni, and at uni, you had people around you, but you had your own room. And then I left and I lived with a friend. And then after that, I lived with another friend, but I then lived on my own in my own places. So that's a state of aloneness. But was I lonely? Not at all, because most of the time I was out engaged in activities. I have friends that will come and see me at home, and often I would go to their houses. I would travel with them. I would go singing, and I'll be at concerts. Most of my weekends were spent surrounded by people, and often at work as well. I was surrounded by others. So I never had a sense of loneliness, because I was always engaged with others in a social way and connecting with other people. So my needs for social connection were always met. But when our needs for social connectedness are not being met, even when we are with other people, we can still be lonely. So you may be surrounded by a family. You could even have a husband or a wife and feel lonely because you are not making those connections. Maybe there's a breach in your relationship. There's a problem that you are no longer communicating, or that you're no longer meeting emotionally your needs for each other. Those things can create a sense of loneliness. I think someone will talk about that later in the week. We can be in relationships and still experience loneliness. And so that has nothing to do with being alone. So aloneness is one thing, it's a physical state, but loneliness is an emotional and a mental state.
Thank you for that. And another question, do you think social media can play a part in people being lonely and disconnected?
Absolutely. I believe that many of us have lost the art of connecting with people. And this is more so for teenagers and Gen Ys, Gen Zs, and Gen Xs, and other younger millennials, because their life has been mostly spent on social media. And yet they have a sense of loneliness, even when they're surrounded with fans. We're going to talk about this, I think, sometime. I'm not sure who's addressing this issue of fandom. You can have fans, but not friends. You can have people who give you likes, lots of people. I've got 4,000 friends on Facebook, actually 5,000 or more. I've probably reached my quota of friends and what Facebook allows. But how many of those people actually interact with me? A limited amount. And those same people actually interact with me on WhatsApp and other places. So to be honest, I probably don't need Facebook because those people on Facebook are just watching my life. They're not actually doing anything to actively and support me. They might say, oh, sorry, but very few of them would then come to me and say, yeah, do you need help? Is there anything? I have a few, but those people go back a long way. People I knew in high school who, when something happens, actually message me and say, you know what, I'm praying for you and I wish you well. There are very few people like that of the 4,000. So really, I spend more of my time off social media. So, and social media can also create a problem in that once we have this sense of, I've got so many people, like I said, we may not. And number two, it may also create the comparison problem that we spoke about, that you see everyone's life is happening, right? and in my language in Zimbabwe, there was a time when this statement was very popular, "Zviru kufaya," meaning everything is going great, you know, and people would post these pictures and say, "Oh, "Zviru kufaya, everything is wonderful, you're glowing," and all this thing. And so we see other people's lives where it looks like it's all amazing. They're having babies, getting married, this another anniversary. And you look at your life and you think, what's wrong with me? And this is where we start to feel that disconnect, like somehow we're internally flawed when we aren't internally flawed, when it's actually just people always put the highlight reels of their lives rather than the bad times. Nobody wants to show you without makeup, their faces without makeup on Facebook or Instagram. They just want to show you what looks good and how amazing their lives are, when actually that may not be the story. So that can create in us the sense that we are disconnected. And when we probably have people around us who we could connect with rather than the people on social media.
And that actually brings another very important point. We do have a lot of loneliness and depression, suicide ideation during Christmas holidays.
Right.
And this is because people have been connected artificially right through the year. And at these important times, people are now with their families. So if you have not been connecting with your family, you are now trying to look for somebody on social media, and they are all posting me and my family, and you are disconnected. The loneliness, the suicide ideation kicks in there.
And I think to add on to that, I think it must have been on one of the slides, I must have missed reading it out. Holidays present that problem, birthdays, anniversaries create a sense of loneliness, but we could do them differently, in the sense that you could make someone say, for example, the anniversary of someone's death. That is when usually people are more conscious of this person being missing from their life. But time is a healer. And I want to emphasize that as time goes on, you may not miss on that person's death or birthday that person as much, but it's so important for us to bring our thoughts into captivity and focus on what we have and gratitude. And as Sister Tembi said, that it may be necessary as well to have connectedness with others throughout the course of the year, so that you can be with them on important dates. Having said that, we in England live in a country where those walls are put up. Christmas is family. If you're from Africa, Christmas is not family per se. If you're from my country in Zimbabwe, Christmas is a communal thing. You may have your lunch as a family, you open your doors to everyone else. You have a party, that's usual. And it's very usual to have weddings on Christmas Day. So people go to weddings on Christmas Day. Lots of people I know that got married on Christmas Day. And so it's not unusual that you are not alone on Christmas Day when you come from other communities, especially from Africa. I'm not sure what it's like in Asia, but generally we're more social on those days. So people people make an effort. Churches will throw parties, and they will have they'll go and feed the poor. They'll go to an old people's home and throw a party for them. That is what goes on where we come from, where I come from anyway. And so it may be that we need to be more cognizant of this when we look at the people in our communities who are immigrants, who are alone, who are young, the government tried to do this at COVID, right? They tried to build bubbles for the singles, because single people were now starkly on their own and you couldn't interact, you couldn't go places. And then they said, okay, if you're single, you can choose your bubble, because they recognized how significant this was a problem. And I would say that choose a bubble for Christmas if you can. And if we are people or families where we do our own thing, invite someone for Christmas dinner and make them feel part of the family. It will really make a difference, because we do know, as Sister Tembi said, that suicide rates spike up around Christmas and post-Christmas, around January, early January, because of this great sense of being alone that people have. And it's not just people who are immigrants, but even local people as well, indigenous people.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions? Anything you want to add, Pastor Todd?
I actually have a question.
Yes.
I'm just wondering whether people who are experiencing chronic loneliness, or is chronic loneliness tantamount to saying that a person is experiencing depression?
Well, it could be. It could be that, of course, depression is strongly linked with loneliness. And when you have a sense of disconnectedness from others for a long time, it could lead to depression.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when people are depressed and they have that sense of loneliness, and it's a symptom of the depression rather than it having caused the depression. So sometimes it's a bit hard to tell. And often, of course, when people are depressed, they disconnect. They want to be on their own. They may not want to interact with other people. They may not want to go out. And so they spend a lot of alone time. They have a lot of that. So it could be both of them. Which came first sometimes can be hard to know. But of course, if you feel chronically lonely, you will get depressed at some point. You will get to a point where, because your brain will not be able to cope with that for too long. And that is why having us address this is an important thing, and intervening in your own mental health. Because if you have stayed years feeling disconnected from others, alone and lonely, you will get to a point, if not already, where you are living in depression or living in a sense of why bother. And I didn't want to go into the morbid stuff, with chronic loneliness, the thoughts that sometimes happen with people, which is why sometimes people do end up taking their own lives, because they just feel like nobody cares. Somebody put a statement that it's also a feeling of not belonging or not being included. And we spoke about discrimination when you are left out for whatever reason or whatever characteristic you may have, visible or not visible, or you feel yourself that you don't belong. And that feeling of not belonging, if it's continuous, can lead people to being depressed, and also to get to a point where they think, why bother living? Because we all want to live connected. And that's why we really want to step in and hopefully help others. The outside things that you may try and do are very important, like meeting with other people, but the internal work is important, of feeling that you belong somewhere, that you belong with God's family. That's an important thing. But I know we want a sense of belonging outside of God. And sometimes God helps us to get to that point. There's a song we used to sing in my old singing group that said, you will come to a point where it says, lean on me when you have no one to, no strength to stand. And then you'll come to the point eventually where you used to think I'm all you have, and then you realize that I'm all you need. There's a point where the void in us is filled by God so much that it comes to where it gets to a point where, because we have that, with God living in us so much, and our joy, our portion is God, our strength is God, that we get to a point where we are joyful in every season. And we're content in every season, and the enemy can't put that sense of you're not enough because you don't have people around you in you, because you have God in you. And I know it's hard. And I feel personally, from my own experiences growing through life, I feel that God brings us through to that stage at any point, at some point. And he has to. It's called the great disillusionment. We have to have it. We must get to a point where we feel disillusioned with the help. My help is not from men. My help is from God. And that great disillusionment is very helpful for our spiritual maturity and getting to know God better for ourselves, and really getting grounded. But often it happens when we're disappointed in relationships. with people in our marriages and so on. But when we work that out right, it comes round to the right place. And the right place is God is my portion and the strength of my help, of my heart. And you'll be fine. You'll be fine. But it takes time and it takes pain, sadly.
Yeah. Thank you so much. As we conclude, there are a number of thank yous on the chat. And one person, somebody said, lastly, the best thing one can do. I've lost that one.
Is get their mind off themselves and think of others.
Yes. And then there's a question there. How do you help someone who is chronically lonely, yet they push you away or is verbally abusive and putting you down?
Well, what I can say is that you can only help people in as far as they want to be helped. And when you're trying to help someone and they keep pushing you away, they've just built a lot of walls around them. And I would say that that person has been through a lot, most likely in life, and they've been through a lot of trauma, and they have that casing to protect themselves. But obviously it's making them very lonely. And the verbal abuse or the pushing away is for you not to get into that heart space, right? Because they're afraid. And it's fear. They're afraid of being hurt, most likely. They're afraid of being let down, of being disappointed. And when that person is in that state, you can drip on them. What I would suggest is drip on them with love from a distance, like the water that drips slowly but surely down the mountain, and it eventually makes a track and even cracks a mountain. Doesn't do it with force. Show them love, pray for them, give them a knowing that you are there to listen if they want to talk and if they want support, but do it gently from a distance when necessary. Slowly, I believe that as a person works through their own issues, they will come around to accepting your support and your love.
Thank you. Years ago, there was a movie called Taming the Shrew. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but it's a very good movie that you can use to help somebody who's pushing you away. And I think we also need to be in a position where you are emotionally healthy and you are not allowing yourself to be verbally abused. So as Edith says, help from a distance. Okay, thank you very, very much. Very engaging topic. Thank you, everyone. One last one is, as an Adventist, we are not to be equally yoked with unbelievers, but in your presentation, you made mention of knocking our doors, our neighbors' doors, making friends with them. It's gone. What is your take on this, please?
Right.
That will be our last question.
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of the times we are lonely in this world because we limit our interactions to people that we believe are of the same mindset as us, same thinking as us, same religion as us. Whereas the world out there is so huge. There's 8 billion people in the world now? And there are only a few of us Adventists. And if we were to limit our interactions and friendships to Adventists, we'd have a very small circle around us. What God speaks of is, yes, we can be unequally yoked in business as well, but most primarily through marriage. And that is the reference to that. But being friends with our neighbors is a duty we have. I'm not even going to say that it's something that will help you with your loneliness. I'm going to say that it's something that's imperative as we mingle with our friends and with our neighbors, that we must mingle with them as Christ did, with the intention of making friends not converting them, of helping them and seeing where we can. And often when you go into people's homes and you know where their prayers are, where you need to pray for them, how you need to pray for them, because we must be interceding for our neighbors and our towns. And you can't do that from a distance. So God instructs us, and Jesus shows us by example how we can make friends with our neighbors and our friends. And it is something that I encourage, greatly encourage. You don't need to marry them. That's all.
Thank you. And as somebody said there, when Jesus was on earth, he mingled. And that's the only way to bring others to know Christ. Christ's method alone.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Sister Edith. And tomorrow we do have Pastor Ray Patrick on situational loneliness. We can't wait to hear what he has to say about that. And Pastor Todd, can you close for us in prayer as we finish? Thank you, everybody, for coming. That was very, very intriguing questions. Thank you, Sister Edith, for answering them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Edith, for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm so blessed. I'm sure a lot of our viewers are blessed today. So, thank you for joining us. As I've mentioned on the chat, we will be putting this on YouTube tonight, the recording that we have, so that if you would like to share this to your friends, you could even share it tonight. Sorry for the technical issues that we have, but and after my prayer, I just remember there was a song that Sister Edith have shared with me, and I will be playing that as our viewers, would start to leave the chat. But it's a very good song that could inspire us all. But let us pray. Lord God, Heavenly Master, we come to you with grateful hearts this evening. Thank you, O God, for sending Sister Edith to us this evening to share all these wonderful thoughts on how we could manage loneliness in our life and how we could even be of help to others. Oh Lord, in the experiences that they are having even right now. Lord, as your people, continue to bless us with your spirit. Continue to give us and send us your holy angels that could give us the joy and the happiness, oh Lord, that we may have in our life. Continue to connect us with people, oh Lord, so that, as you have said, you have come into this world so that we could live our life to the fullest, and may it be our daily experiences, oh God, as we continue through the help of your power and of your grace to manage our thoughts, our minds, and our daily life, especially this wonderful life that you have given to us. Continue to bless Sister Tembi, Sister Edith, and the rest who have attended this meeting tonight. And may it be, oh Lord, that we would leave this meeting tonight fully blessed and ready to bless other people. Thank you, Jesus, for loving us. For this we ask in your loving name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Well, good night for now, and I'll share the music, and you could, if you want to leave or if you want to finish the music, it will be all up to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Sometimes the road gets rough and I don't know what to do. The sky seems so cloudy and the storm is about to pass. In the midst of this confusion, you put your hand in mine, and I know I'm not Lord, for making me know that I am not alone. No. Hey, I'm not alone. Jehovah is right by my side. Sometimes when trouble comes my way, I just don't know what to do. My friend seems so distant, and I don't know where to go. In the midst of this confusion, you put your hand in mine, and I know I'm not alone. I know that I'm not alone. Though the devil seems to intimidate me, I know I'm not alone. I know that I'm alone. I know that I'm not alone. I want to thank you, Lord, for making me know that I am not. Oh, no. Though the devil seems to intimidate me, I know that I'm never alone. I want to thank you, Lord, for making me know that I am not alone. I'm not alone. Jehovah is right by my side. Don't you be afraid, child of the living God is right with you. Don't you be afraid.